right, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for another day, another opportunity to grow, another opportunity to offer the sacrifice of praise and worship, and to be a blessing to one another, and thereby offer the sacrifice of doing good and of sharing, as Hebrews tells us. And I pray that today we would demonstrate all of those as the Spirit of God gives us the ability. Be honored as we discuss these matters of culture in our class today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, get that on and get that on. I'm still on the area of communication, high context and low context, because there are some passages that I really want to run by you before we switch into the next one. What is going on in these highlighted areas? It's something that we talked about last class period. What do you see happening here? What is the man in the story doing? Yeah, Jules?
He sent a servant to communicate, like we were talking about an advocate.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. We talked about intermediaries, I think the Bible uses the word mediator, it uses the word advocate, which is lawyer, which is somebody that comes between, intercession, all those words refer to that. So here's a case in this culture where this guy is not afraid of Jesus. It's because of his high respect for Jesus that he doesn't feel worthy to confront him face to face. And so he sends someone to represent him and to talk to Jesus. So if you go to a culture that is like this and you find that people are hesitant to come to you and talk to you personally, it's not because you have bad breath, it's not because you're ugly, it's not because they don't like your personality, it's because they hold you in high esteem and they don't feel that it's honorable to approach you, on their own merits. That makes sense? It's just something we're so easy to take things personally when people respond certain ways. And I'm just trying to help you if God would take you to a place like this, not to allow that sort of thing to be misinterpreted. Okay? So that's a good illustration of that. All right. Here's a Q&A with the disciples. Now, what do you see going on here if you look at the highlighted green? What aspects of communication come to light here? This is not intercession. This is totally different. What do you see happening? Do you think, yeah, Jules?
I was going to say direct communication, like kind of like we're doing right now, like you ask a question and then we answer. So it's like
That's really cool. I didn't even think about that. The fact that I'm asking you a question is a form of indirect communication. I want to communicate something to you, but I'm not just going to stand here and tell you. Mm-hmm. I want to draw it out. So yeah, and that's exactly what Jesus, notice he starts with a statement, who do the people out there say I am? He's kind of warming them up and drawing them into the conversation. And then when they've given the answers, he says, okay, now who do you say I am? And that's the more direct communication. But he starts with a broader statement. And a lot of times that's a really good idea for all of us, regardless of what culture you live in. To come at somebody with a little bit more general question before you hone in on who they are, what they think. Okay, good. Yeah. Do you remember the parable of the tenants? He's explaining a parable, and at the end of the parable, the chief priests and Pharisees perceive that he's speaking about them. What's happening here? And we could actually just repeat what we just said. This is another form of indirect communication. Now, we know that one of the reasons that Jesus spoke in parables was what? Actually stated in Matthew 13. Why did he switch to parables?
to confuse people who weren't specific.
Right. You've had opportunity to hear it directly. You've rejected it. Now you're going to hear it in puzzling stories. But at the same time, those who have a heart to hear will be able to view these as illustrations to actually increase their understanding. But notice that he's using indirect communication because he is speaking about the Pharisees, the chief priests and the Pharisees. Chief priests, remember, were from the Sadducee line, and the Pharisees, so they're probably referring to the Sanhedrin, and he's using indirect communication to get at them, right? Good. Okay, same thing here. It's a parable. He asked a question. Remember at the table when the host is offended because this woman, washed his feet and broke, so he asks a question. He gives a parable, then he says, okay, you tell me now, which one is going to be more appreciative of the forgiveness offered? And he answers. So it's a very kind way. Jesus is a guest in a house. And even though he has every right to do so as the Son of God, he doesn't just point the finger at the guy and say, you're out of bounds. He tells a story, and he allows the man of the house to speak and, in a sense, to condemn himself by what he says. Okay? So a very kind and gentle way of Jesus, but also making sure the point gets across to everybody. Yeah. See, and then he does become a little more direct when he turns to the woman and he applies the parable to him directly. Okay. And then we talked about this one before, Nathan using the parable of the man that stole a guy's only sheep. Now, we would expect Paul to be direct, right? Who's more direct than the Apostle Paul? He comes to Cephas, Peter in Antioch, and he says, I opposed him to his face. That's interesting to say that. I mean, there is no indirect communication here at all, no context. And why did he do it that way? We're not told here if this happened in a group setting or if Paul pulled him aside one-on-one and privately confronted him. We're not told that. I would like to think that maybe he pulled him aside, but knowing Paul, I can also imagine Paul doing this in a public setting because he wanted everybody there to hear what he was saying. Everybody was affected publicly by what Peter did in siding with James and the Jews. And so it's very possible that Paul wanted everybody to hear this, and so he was very direct. Yeah. So was that culturally acceptable or not? Well. All right. So I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly. How do you begin a conversation with a new friend? Okay. Let me just ask you this. Regardless of the culture that you're in, if you want an idea that'll work in just about any culture in the world, how could you answer this question? What way of beginning a conversation would work probably anywhere in the world that you went? Paul?
Salutation.
Okay, salutation. Okay, so that'd be maybe the more formal, the formal part, greeting. And after that, then what would you launch into?
Simple conversation saying, where are you from? Or what do you do?
Yeah. Now, the first one, where are you from? And then add to that, how's your family? Those are things. If you ask what you do, like, what kind of job you have, that may not work in some places. Okay, here in our country, I can meet somebody new, and in short order, I can say, so what do you do for a living? And they're not offended by that. But there are cultures where to ask that question soon could be offensive because the person, well, tell me why. How could that be offensive in some places? So what do you do for a living? How would they interpret that question? Jules?
You're trying to steal from them or get too much into their personal.
Trying to what? I'm sorry.
Steal from them or get too much into their personal life and lose faith.
Okay, steal from them or get too much into their personal lives. Okay, good. Somebody want to add to that? Paul?
Personal, or it's a personal thing you don't really want to start asking yet.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite as their friends. So only the friends the person should be open to the friends and tell them what you do.
Okay.
Not a friend, so it's kind of weird to jump into that.
Okay, all right. So, and there's a reason for that. What is it that makes your job in some cultures and a conversation about your job too personal? You're right. But what is it about that subject that can be too personal in some places?
Is the question like finances or status?
Bingo, that second word, status. In some cultures, remember, in many cultures, especially honor-shame cultures and high power distance cultures, status is everything. And in some places, if you walk in and you start asking questions about occupation right off the bat, they think that you are trying to place them, on a certain status level in comparison to yourself. In other words, you're ranking them. That makes sense? And that can be offensive. But if you ask about their family, where are you from? Tell me about your family. You have children? How about, I got 3 grandchildren. Oh, tell me about them. That is, in almost any culture, that is very unoffensive. It relaxes you. It's just one of those subjects that in any culture that I can think of would be appropriate. Okay? But if I ask, oh man, it's a nice house, how much you pay for that? No, I don't think you want to do that, okay? Wow, this is a really nice house. So what do you do for a living? Don't do that, okay? I remember when I came to Iowa from Ohio, like I said, I knew nothing about farming. And so first thing I'd want to ask a farmer, if I had a colleague here at Faith who was from a farm, first thing I wanted to ask was, how big's your farm? And I found that people didn't really like to answer that question, because they didn't like the idea that people would size them up based on how many acres they had. Somebody would say, oh, I got a couple thousand acres. Wow. So what am I thinking? Man, they're rich. And so farmers would often say, people told me after, don't ask a farmer how many acres he has, or maybe even how many head of cattle do you have, at least at the beginning. Say, hey, so ask something like, so tell me what it's like growing up on a farm. And I've never had a problem with that. Oh, I love it. In fact, I have never talked to somebody that grew up on a farm that said I hated it. And probably parts of it they hate, but people who grew up on farms seem to really appreciate it. So anyway, that's the idea there. All right, so what do you do for a living? Maybe not so fast. Tell me about your family. There you go. There you go. All right, we're going to switch into the next one. Anybody have any other questions or comments about communication before we transition? We've covered a lot of stuff. Lifestyle, being versus doing. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, Jules?
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I have a comment.
Yeah.
One time we were talking in our house and like how much we make like in general. And one of the rules at my old job at Fairway and also at my dad's job is that it's like an unspoken rule. You're not supposed to tell how much you make, because like the other person could make less or more than you, and it would be kind of like disrespectful to just how much do you make?
It's kind of condescending for you, if you start asking how much somebody makes, yeah. And that's true in other realms too. Like for instance, I know I have a relative who's in the counseling business. Now there are different views on this, but he takes the position that he can never tell his counselees anything personal. Like if he's dealing with a problem that they have and he's had a similar problem, ethically he doesn't feel like he can say, oh yeah, I've wrestled with that myself. I had a lot of trouble with that, and because he feels like it brings the level of respect down, and it may even make the counselee hesitant to trust him if he's had that trouble himself. Now again, that's going to depend on Dr. Keck and others that are into that more would have their own opinions about that. But yeah, good. All right, let's move into lifestyle, being versus doing. What's this all about? So here's a question for you. How would you answer that? Or maybe in your present context, do you study to, do you live to study, or do you study to live, just to survive? Where would you be on that? Which one of those sounds more like you? Yeah, Ella?
I feel like it almost depends on what stage of life you're in, just because I don't know, in high school I worked at a nursing home and I liked it, but I did it so I could go to school.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't wake up every day wanting to go,
And
So-
I think now in school, like I want to do well and get good grades so that I can get to a point where I'm live to work.
Okay.
As of right now, I work to live.
Okay,
You know what I
yep,
mean?
yep. Would that be true of most of you right now? You're more in the work to live, study to, because you're in transition. And everything you're doing right now is preparatory, right? You're, and maybe not everything, but in general, you are in a phase of life right now where you're doing something in order to become something else. And that's the idea of working to live. Yeah. Do you all know somebody that lives to work? Do you? What do we mean by that statement? Ella, how would you describe that? What's that mean?
Well, I don't necessarily think of it as like being a workaholic, but more like I just love my job so much. It's my passion, and I just like that's my life. I just love it.
Yeah. Is there anything wrong with that? No. In fact, I would hope that every single one of you would be able to say that wherever God takes you. I just love doing it. Not that you like everything about it, but I just love doing this. I love teaching. You know, if somebody asks me, what's your job? It doesn't even sound like the right question, because I don't. I mean, sometimes, you know, I hear people say I almost feel guilty getting paid for this, but don't worry, the guilt feeling goes away. I do need to get paid for this. I got to eat. If I don't eat, I can't do this. Yeah, yeah, good. So you're right, Ella. Some of it does depend on your stage in life, where you are, and you know what the end game is. Good. All right. So let's fill in a few. Let me see what the next slide is. Well, okay, hang on. Before we fill in, let me just read a couple things. Lifestyle, being versus doing. And this, you can see the website down there. It's just a random one that I found that I thought was interesting. Should time be spent primarily on being productive, or is it more liberally dispersed across various obligations in life? This is the debate that surrounds the being versus doing cultural value. The Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, are some of the most being cultures in the world. The U.S. is a strong doing culture organized around performance and achieving results. Work is both a passion and a preoccupation. Okay? Would you all agree that the U.S. is very much a doing culture? It's being able to check things off and being done. And again, that's not wrong in and of itself. Either one of these to an extreme can be harmful. Okay? Let's fill in a few blanks. And the main idea, the being orientation is primarily concerned with overall, what word would you use there, quality or quantity of life? The being culture. Quality of life. It's not so much how much you get done, how many things have you accomplished. The question is, what have I become? That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting to think about. We make a big deal in our culture of resumes, right? This is something you can put on your resume or your portfolio, and I'm not against those things. I have a resume. In fact, we as a faculty are required every year to update we call them our curriculum vitae, which is a fancy way of saying our resume, what we've done, okay? Because in our culture, when people look at our faculty, they want to see who we are, where we've come from. They want to read those bullet points. But in other cultures, that's not such a big deal. It's more about quality of life. Letter B, the doing orientation strives to, and the word there is maximize through opportunity. Here's another quote. Comes from futurelearn.com. Again, they're just random ones that I've looked up. I read in the newspaper that in 2017, so it's already getting old, workers in the United States forfeited 212 million vacation days just in that 1 year, amounting to $62.2 billion in lost benefits. In other words, they worked on days that they could have taken legitimately as vacation day. Now, I don't know about you, but if I got vacation days coming, I'm going to take it. I'm just going to take it. But And I don't know, how extensive and accurate this research was. It's somebody's research. But even if it's close, that tells you something. Now, some of that may be because the boss is pressuring, hey, we're behind, can you please come and give us a little extra time, or whatever. Okay. And a lot of these people are probably people working salaried jobs, where sometimes when you're working a salaried position and you're not getting an hourly wage, there's more pressure to work extra because you're getting this paid the same no matter what. Okay. Anybody here ever had a salary job where you're paid salary instead of hourly? Yeah. That's one of the. Okay. Anybody familiar with this book, Conformed to His Image by Kenneth Boa? Okay. Actually, this is a book that we had to read for my doctoral work when I was taking the courses here a few years ago. Kenneth Boa, and he's been around for quite a while. Here's what he says: the civil religion of America. He's being a little sarcastic there. The civil religion of America worships the God of progress and inspires us to compete, achieve, and win for the sake of competing, achieving, and winning. In other words, a lot of it's just about proving that you're the best. That's that competition, cooperation thing we talked about. Life for many people in the business world has been colorfully described as a matter of blowing and going, plotting and planning, ducking and diving, running and gunning, slamming and jamming, moving and shaking, shucking and jiving. Now, Miriam, I don't know if all that makes sense to you. It doesn't all make sense to me. Shucking, I'm not sure what, and jiving, I don't know, is that, you guys on board with that? Is that I don't know. Anyway, and then he says later on, longshoreman philosopher, guys that work out on who's the East Coast people here? Anybody from the East Coast? No. Longshoreman philosopher Eric Hoffer wrote, we are warned not to waste time, but we are brought up to waste our lives. This is evident in the tragedy of many people who in the first half of their lives spend their health looking for wealth, and the last half, they spend their wealth looking for health. Think about that. Yeah, I've heard stories of professional athletes, they beat themselves up, and then by 45 years of age, they're using a walker, I'm not against professional sports, but it is something you have to consider, and so here you go. So a little bit sarcastic, but trying to make a point. And can I say this to you? There will be times in your ministry or in your life, whatever God leads you to do, where you will be a little workaholic. There are phases where that just happens. The problem is not that we do those things occasionally. The problem is if that becomes the steady pace, then you're in trouble. You can't run a 100-yard dash in a marathon, however many 100-yard dashes. You can't run at that pace in a marathon. You have to pace. There may be times in a marathon when you can speed it up and, run at high speed for a few minutes, then you have to slow down. So we're not talking about being completely bad. I want to play for you, before I get to this, I'm going to play for you a video. And online students, I have to pause the video here because sometimes YouTube, when it sees that I'm playing a video, even though I bought this course and I can legitimately play it, if YouTube sees it, it might nix the whole video recording. And so I have to pause the recording. Can you guys please help me to remember to turn it back on after this little clip? All right, thanks. So online students, I'm sorry I can't play this for you, and I can't send it to you because I bought it. But we'll summarize it briefly afterwards. All right, so let me pause this. Okay, you guys in class, what's your reaction to that? Jules?
He was kind of rude because he was saying to him basically, your life could be better, even though he literally ended the sentence, but I have all that I need.
Okay, so here's a guy that is already realizing each day the life that the New Yorker tells him that he could have if he spent 15 or 20 years building a big enterprise, fishing enterprise. Okay, all right. Can anybody detect a potential response to another kind of response to this fisherman that may involve something he needs to consider? Is there something else that he may need to think about? Yeah.
Well, if you were a believer, the point is not
not to live for yourself and to just do what makes you happy. Like this makes sense from a worldly viewpoint if you think this is all you have. But if you're living for eternity, then you're going to live so you can give the gospel to other people. That has to be a part of the way you use your time.
Okay. All right. Good.
There's two cultures. You see the American dream, and also you see the Mexican who really does not know much of American dream, but has an idea of how life works.
Okay. So his emphasis is on what? In one word, the Mexican fisherman is emphasizing what in life? Pardon? Well, yeah, the quality of life, but who's he talking about? You know, when he talks about what he does for the rest of his day after he fishes. It's relationships, right? He goes home and has fish with his family, plays with the kids, and hangs out with his friends. So and what the New Yorker is trying to tell him is, you know, you can have all that, but you know, you can also become very rich and build a big business, never have to worry about finances again. One of the things that you might be tempted to suggest to the fisherman is, you know, right now you're able to do this, but what if there is a crisis in your life? What if something happens, you're debilitated, or, you know, there's a disaster, a flood, or a tsunami or something? You know, in other words, he's kind of doing what a subsistence farmer does. You know what subsistence farming is, right? It's just farming enough to feed yourself and your family, as opposed to a big-time farmer that, you know, has a big corporation. And so, you know, you might be tempted to say, you know, this is all good as long as you're healthy and things are going well, you know, and you don't have any, you know, huge unexpected bills or crises in your life, or what happens. And he doesn't mention, of course, the story. I'm assuming it's a fictional story. And so there are other things that can become part of the equation when you're thinking about this scenario, right? Okay, good. I thought that was interesting. So, number 4, or you can see the map there too in your notes. Scandinavia is considered one of the most being-oriented cultures. I think we're going to get to this later, but one of those countries is actually seriously considered reducing the work week in order to give people more chance to develop their personal lives, which in their opinion will make them more effective workers. But we'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay. Notice the contrast between China and Japan. And again, China is very diverse, so this is a stereotypical map here. But by and large, the people are more being-oriented, whereas in Japan, it's very much a doing. In fact, in Japan, until recent years, the suicide rate was very high because of the pressure placed on people to work by their companies. Your loyalty to your company actually had to exceed your loyalty to your own family. And the suicide, and the Japanese began to recognize that. And so they did make some adjustments to allow people to cultivate their family relationships a little bit more and not have to work so much, okay? By the way, can I ask you a question? Where did the idea of an 8-hour work week come from? We just kind of take that. In Germany, is a normal work day, I said work week, is a normal work day in Germany 8 hours or not? Do you know? Okay, it is here, you know, a normal work week, 40 hours, pending some 44 if you work a half day Saturday. Did anybody know where that came from? Yeah.
Didn't it come in part from all the like unions and child labor laws in the late 1800s?
Yeah. Before child labor laws, there was a huge abuse of people's time. 12-hour work days, even for children sometimes. And I can't tell you who came up with the 8-hour idea. I have read from a couple of sources that Henry Ford at least had input in this. You know, he's the one that really popularized the mass production idea with factories. By the way, Henry Ford did not invent the car, right? The car actually probably was invented first by the French. And there are probably a lot of people involved, but the French are kind of credited with the earliest. But he's the one that really popularized mass production. And he recognized the importance of limiting. You get a lot of people to work, and not everybody, you don't have to work as much. But child labor laws also really put the clamp on that. So exactly how they arrived at, the idea of 8 hours as opposed to 10 or 6 or whatever, I don't know. But it probably was something that just kind of evolved over time and then came to be a standard. All right. Let me get this. I'm going to get this back up again. Just a minute here. Okay. All right. So, all right, this is not, this is not specifically in your notes, all right? I'm going to give it to you. If you want to take a screenshot of it or something or whatever, you can. In the doing culture, status has to be earned. Okay, in our country, in the Western world in general, anybody can become anything, all things being equal, right? Doesn't matter who you are, how poor your family was, what your ethnicity is, what part of the country you're from, you can become the president of the country if you work hard. Okay, status has to be earned. What about a being culture? How is status determined there? What would you say? Yeah.
Would it be more family oriented?
It definitely can involve family. Oops, sorry, we're gonna have to come back to that in a minute. Sorry, I forgot. For some reason, I cannot get this animation in PowerPoint to go back and forth. I don't know why. So I'll come back to that answer. In a doing culture, titles are very important. Okay? Here at the college, now I had students calling me Dr. Mark as freshmen, Dr. Lowndes, when they came in, just because a lot of students come to faith assuming everybody has a doctorate, okay? You don't go to the doctor's office and say, hi, Bill, hello, Dr. whoever, right? Titles are important because titles signify achievement, right? So again, you can see how it ties into cooperation versus competition and that whole achievement thing. So titles are associated with the earning of a status. Tasks and deadlines are important. How do you earn this status? You earn it by doing this. You've got a list of tasks, you've got deadlines. Do I need to talk to you guys about tasks and deadlines? No. It's your whole life right now, right? By the way, do countries that are being cultures have schools like Faith? They do. Now, we can sit here and argue how much of that is because of Western missionaries taking education to those countries. But, how much of that is colonialism? How much of that is influence from the West? That's a very inexact science. And then in a doing culture, activity in the world is important. We've talked about that, what you do, Okay, so in contrast, Justin, status in a being culture is innate, which means you're born with it. Okay, so you talk about family. Yeah, I mean, look at England. Your dad is the King of England, or your mother is Queen Elizabeth. You are born with a status. Now, does everybody appreciate that? Just if you studied at all recent history in England, in the monarchy, some of the kids who grew up in that system rebelled against it and actually left it, okay? And so, but status is innate. What country would probably be the best example of being born into a status? Yeah, India. The whole caste system is all about that, yeah. And you can, in fact, if you have a passport or birth certificate as an Indian citizen, it puts the caste that you're in on there, and that can never change. You can work up within the limitations of that caste, but you are always going to be part of that caste. Can never move to another one. Okay. Now, Western influence, globalization has influenced that somewhat. But titles are relative because you are who you are. You are who you are innately by birth. And so, do they use titles? Yes. But those titles aren't necessarily earned, okay? They are important, but it's more about who you are by birth. And then rather than tasks and deadlines, people and harmony are more important. You saw that in the story that we read about the Mexican fisherman. Wasn't interested in becoming a billionaire, and having a big fishing corporation. He was interested in his family and his friends and social concerns. All right? And then activity in the world, and of course, this is looking at it from a Christian standpoint. Being emphasizes intimacy with Christ. This is not in your notes. I think I got this. I may have gotten one of those books that I just showed you. I think I may have gotten it out of there. Intimacy with Christ is more. Now, is activity in the world important for Christians? It has to be, because when we stand before Jesus someday, we're going to give an account of everything we did in the body. That's activity, okay? And so we understand that it's not. Again, there's no such thing as a culture that's completely one or the other. All right. Okay. So let's talk about these different aspects of culture. Okay. These are different areas where being and doing is played out. Okay. I thank the Lord for my dad. I don't usually say this in this class. My dad and mom both came from broken homes. Their parents were divorced. Their dads had very little to do with them. My mom's dad went out once at Christmas time during the Depression. Everybody's poor. And he was able to scrounge up enough money to buy a turkey or a ham for Christmas, and he took it to his girlfriend's house. And his wife and kids didn't get anything. I mean, my parents both came out. When they got married, they were married a little later in life. My dad was 33, my mom was 28 when they got married. Because having come out of those backgrounds, they were both really hesitant about, getting married. They didn't have any, family life was not a joy for them. But when they got married, even though my dad wasn't a Christian at first, they both got married with the idea we are not going to let this happen with our children. So my dad worked for Champion Spark Plugs. He was a design engineer. But he worked 8 to 4:30, and when he was done at 4:30, he was home by 4:45. It was just almost like clockwork. He didn't work overtime, except for very, very few cases when they needed it over the years. And when he was home, he was home. In fact, he probably went to the other extreme. My dad did not like to go out and do things in the community. That's one of the reasons why he had a hard time going to church. He saw me, when I got saved, get really involved in church, and he kind of rebelled against that. He didn't want to be away from the house, always having to do something. He wanted to be with the family. So, there's a good side of that, and then there's a not so good side. But anyway, these are some areas where that comes into play. So, okay. Here's another quote for you. In being mode, the being culture, the mind has nothing to do, nowhere to go, and can focus fully on moment-by-moment experience, allowing us to be fully present and aware of whatever is here right now. Now, obviously, when I read that, you're saying, that's kind of far out, okay? This is from a site called mindful.org, and it's kind of a new age kind of a site. A lot of emphasis on just becoming, and we're letting go, okay? So it's an extreme statement, all right? It says, the same one says, in doing mode, by contrast, this wonderful multi-dimensional complexity of experience is boiled down to a narrow, one-dimensional focus. What does this have to say about my progress in reaching my goals? So this particular website views the doing culture as very narrow and limiting. I have to focus on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and there's no room just to be. So yes, it's not a Christian website, but it does say something that at least reinforces the main ideas of a being and a doing culture. Yeah, anyway, it's exaggerated. Here's another one. Instead of looking, this is HuffPost.com. Same kind of idea. Instead of looking at your day as an endless to-do list, what if you started each day with a question? At the end of the day, how do I want to feel? After you ponder that one, you can ask yourself, what will make me feel that way? This is secular psychology, okay? But let me ask you this question, just thinking about this. When you go to bed at night, okay, and you want to sleep well, do you find that you can sleep well if you've accomplished a lot of things, or if something has happened during your day that you feel has helped you to become what God wants you to become? And you don't need to answer that out loud, just something to think about, I confess that I tend to be more of a doing person. And if I go to bed at night and certain things didn't get done, sometimes that keeps me awake or wakes me up at about 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning is my magical wake-up time to think about things. Don't know why. But usually if something wakes me up in the night and I'm worrying, find myself worrying, it's because of something I didn't do. Why is it so easy? What makes it hard? Why is it that we tend to be so driven by what we get done rather than what we become? Jules?
Because we grew up in a culture where it's more important to stay on task and to keep your priorities straight
Okay.
than to focus on the non-important or non-important.
Okay, yeah, right, we do. If we grew up in that culture, that's going to be easy. Let me add something else to that, and that is, let me ask you this. Which one of those is easier to measure? What you do. How do you measure what you're becoming? I mean, you can sense growth spiritually, right? When you're walking with the Lord. But it's really, really difficult to objectively measure growth spiritually, who you're becoming. It's very easy to measure accomplishments. And I think that's one of the reasons why, we tend to wrestle with that. And you're right, Jules, it does have to do with where you grew up. But one is a lot easier to measure than the other one. Okay, so here's the being versus doing. All right, and this is just review. We've already filled these in. Being is quality of life, doing, maximizing every opportunity. Let's just start talking a little about the work world, then we'll be done. Okay, number 4, in the work world, question is, do you work to live or do you live to work? And I've already asked that question. Probably most of us would say the temptation, at least, is to live to, or is to work to live. It's more of a pragmatic. Letter B, there is a correlation between competitive and doing cultures. And we've already talked about that as well. Makes sense. If you're in a competitive culture, it's what you get done that's going to determine, whether you win or lose. Number 3, or letter C, corporate entities are usually doing cultures. Performance and passion are highly valued. In the corporate world, you often hear people talk about stepping on people's feet, going up the corporate ladder, right? That kind of a thing. So these are very important. Doing, doing, doing. In fact, what do we ask people in our culture? What do you do for a living? Interesting, the word do. Now, letter D, in the U.S., a person's 2 worst moments are, now you have to shift the time a little bit in college, 9 a.m. on Monday and the first few months of retirement. Why is it that we have this thing about, Monday morning, coffee cup that says I'm allergic to Monday morning, or whatever. Because a lot of people live for the weekends, which is interesting. What about the first few months of retirement? What's that all about? Well, just ask the wives of husbands who retire and come home, and they're used to going to work every day, and now all of a sudden they're in the kitchen telling the wife how to cook. She's been cooking for 40 years for him, and now he's in there trying to tell her how to cook and how to do this, and she says, just go back to work, will you? Doesn't happen all the time, but it can. All right, we got to stop there right in the middle. We'll finish the rest of that later on. All right, thank you guys. See you on Friday.